What's up, everybody? This is Belligerent. Let's talk about being a coach. This is the Q. Welcome in. I believe this is episode 13 or 14. I forgot to look it up before I started this. Let me know if you remember what episode it is. I'm just kidding. I will actually figure out what episode it is, but I know we're on episode 13 or 14. And so, what I wanted to talk about tonight is I got a message from one of my very few fans of the podcast on Twitter asking me about being a coach a little bit. He was kind of in a similar situation as me. I will never be one of the greatest gamers in the world. My mechanics just aren't there, especially in my older age here. But it doesn't. And so I thought, he had some questions about being a coach, which I haven't answered yet on Twitter, but his message did kind of inspire this podcast. So shouts out to you, and I will get back to you on Twitter, I promise. But I think that the world of Vainglory needs some coaches. Not a lot. I mean, it feels like every team has a coach or somebody acting as coach, but not very many I feel that are super influential in their team success or anything like that. I have actually had multiple teams, including Nova, when I just had to step down, ask me for some insight on who they could possibly look at as coach. I think Nova is in a good spot with left there if that's the decision that they decide to go in. Kind of acted as my assistant coach while he was there and I was there, and really stepped in big time when I had to. When real life got in the way and the reason that I had to step down and things of that nature. But my answer to kind of both of them was that I couldn't really think of anybody who wasn't already coaching a team, and let's face it, being a coach can be a difficult position to get into. So let me start off there and talk about kind of my journey through being a coach. Just to give you guys a feel for how that's a question that I get a lot is how did you do it? How did you get into it? Things like that. So we got to go back probably to the end of last year, August-ish, I believe, where I was inspired to start doing build guides on vaingloryfire.com. Great site. I haven't been there for a while just because I've been caught up and too busy and things of that nature. But at the time, it was really the only way for me to step into the community. And I was just really, and I wanted to make my build guides a little different when I looked at build guides, kind of when I was new to Vainglory and trying to find out how to build somebody or whatever. It felt like it was lacking. A lot of them were builds, and yeah, that's what but none of it really explained it. And I knew that if I wanted to do mine, I wanted to do it different. I wanted to be more thorough than some of the build guides that I had seen on there, and really just break everything down. So I started diving heavily into the statistical side of Vainglory. And because for me, and the way my brain works is I want to know why it works, how it works. I don't just want you to tell me it works. I want to know why. So I started diving heavily into the statistics and figuring out exactly what the optimal builds were, what the most powerful builds were, things like that. And there's more there's things that numbers can't really tell us, or if the numbers can tell us, it's a lot more complicated math than I'm capable of, because there's effects and things of that nature that obviously if you just want the most damage, you build whatever it is, 5 sorrow blades and a tyrant's monocle or whatever. You can do things like that, but that doesn't take into account effects and things like armor piercing, armor shredding, burst damage, stuff like that. So what I did with my builds is I would play multiple games, um, with a particular build and casual and kind of, and I also just didn't want, like when I did it, I didn't want my builds to be kind of the same build everybody else was putting out there. So my build guides were not always based around the most optimal builds. They were kind of other builds that I was finding success with. Anyways, I'm kind of getting off track. What that did was that really helped me understand the how and the why things work. Gave me a really good understanding for the game, even though my brain and my fingers were not fast enough to react to, be a pro level player. Also, at that time, I had another podcast going. Was very active on Twitter with the Twitter account for that podcast, and I started, kind of just sending out tweets, trying to be active, trying to give people who decided to follow our podcast something to follow. And so me and my partner, Truth and Cliche at that time, were live tweeting all throughout the VG8s. And that kind of got us noticed. And so what happened one day is I wandered onto Fuji's Twitter page when he was coach of Echo Fox and saw a tweet that was actually several months old, but was still pinned on his Twitter feed. So I assumed that it was, it was at least active enough for me to inquire. So they were looking for an analyst for Echo Fox. So I inquired there. Shortly after that, the Gangstars organization put out a tweet saying that they were looking for a coach. So I applied for that as well, trying to use all of the analytical knowledge that I had gained from doing these build guides. And so it turned out at the time that Echo Fox was in a weird spot because they had just, the season had just ended. Or no, I'm sorry, the split had just ended. They were going into challenge battles, and so they weren't even sure about the future of the team at that point. So they didn't want to bring me on as an analyst and not really have a future in front of them as far as what they were going to be doing, whether the org was going to be staying in VG, things of that nature. So that one was kind of placed on the back burner, so to speak, and ended up being that after some conversations, some interviews, type things like that, that Gangstars decided to give me a chance. Why? I don't know. I never asked. I don't know what impressed them. I don't know if I was one of just few applicants and just happened to be the best out of the few applicants they got. Because one thing I've noticed is that when teams are looking for coaches and things like that, there's a lot of people who just say, well, it can't be me. I can't do that. So I don't know how many applications they got for coach. So maybe I was just the best out of a bunch of bad picks. And then after I left Gangstars, kind of fast forwarding a little bit, I was going to take a break, and then I decided that I didn't want to take a break. And so I decided to come back. I put it out on Twitter there. I applied to the team manager job for Misfits that they posted about. Got turned down for that one. I applied to be the coach for Fnatic, which was a team I was really excited to coach. It came down. At least from what I was told, is I was the only coach from North America, from the NA region that they were considering because of the time change. It came down to me and Kigaza, I assume, because he was the one they ended up giving the job to. I didn't get that job, but they had lots of great things to tell me, which was a decent consolation prize. And so at that point, it was kind of starting to feel like I wasn't going to have an opportunity. Also, while I was going through the application process with Fnatic, I did get contacted by Nova, their marketing manager, messaged me and then pulled me into a chat of a bunch of other managers who I didn't at that time know, but the conversation just kind of fizzled in Discord at that moment. So I guessed that they weren't really interested or whatever. And so I continued forward with Fnatic. And then after the Fnatic thing fell through, one day out of the blue, I ended up getting contacted by Trevor, the Nova manager, who wanted to continue the conversation with me. It turned out that he was going through some personal things in real life, and just it wasn't that they weren't interested in me with that earlier conversation, he just wasn't able to. And I get that. I understand that. A lot of the people involved in esports, it's not their full time gig, especially if you're in vainglory, because it just doesn't pay enough, especially for support staff. So ended up hooking up with Nova. That one was more largely due to, I based off of kind of my resume from Gangstars and stuff like that, more so than having to go through any type of interview process. But that's kind of a rundown of my journey to being a coach. And let's talk about you. Maybe you're interested in being a coach. Maybe you're like me. I can't tell you how many times I got questions from people. How can you be a coach when you're only skill tier, whatever, 6, 7, 8? The highest I've ever been is 8 silver. Well, because, Bill Belichick can't throw the ball as good as Tom Brady. Doesn't mean he can't coach him. Right? Yeah. Steve Kerr can't. Well, maybe he can. I was going to say Steve Kerr can't shoot the ball as good as Steph Curry. Well, wait, I forgot Steve Kerr used to be a very good player on the Bulls. Anyway, you don't have to be able to do it in order to understand it and coach it. And it's just like in any activity, whether it's sports, being a doctor, whatever. Oftentimes, those who are best at doing the job are not the best at teaching the job. Because sometimes it just comes so easy to them, it comes so natural to them. Sometimes their brains work in different ways, and not everybody can explain things, teach people, coach people. So if you're not VG skill tier, but you're interested in being a coach, doesn't mean that you can't just because you're not good at playing the game. You have to have an understanding of the game. And, in esports, I find a lot of times that, and there was a coach a while back, I think he was, that I met in London. I was talking to him and he put it best, said that, we're more personality managers than we are coaches. And I find that to be, that's a lot of what being a coach in esports is, keeping your guys on track. It depends on the team. I've had a couple of different experiences. Is where when I was with Gangstars, I was dealing with all 20-something-year-olds, and they were kind of had a very professional approach, and they just needed a new set of eyes. They need different perspectives, and I think frankly they needed sometimes to have people, myself, remind them of some of the little things like vision or clearing vision and things like that. I think sometimes pros get to that level, and it's just like we see pros that don't build defense because you get so good, you start to believe that you don't need certain things, and so kind of some person, and then there were disagreements amongst the team where we should have rotated here, we shouldn't have did this, or we should have did this. And sometimes you play mediator, sometimes you get, just give your opinion, and as coach you kind of direct the team as, okay, both of you have valid opinions, but next time we're going to go this direction, things like that. It's not all being a great player, but you also have to have an understanding of the game. And I will admit, my understanding of the game when I joined Gangstars was not as great as I thought it was. I learned an immense amount from those guys. Iraqi taught me more about this game and building, preparing a draft and building a draft than I could have fathomed before I got that chance with Gangstars. I I owe a lot of my success, if that's what you want to call it. I owe a lot of my coaching experience and coaching knowledge to Iraqi Zorro because of what I learned from him being the player and me being the coach. I I hope that you know it was somewhat mutual, that I was able to you know teach them some things, even if it wasn't improving them as a player, but maybe improving their mindset or helping them make decisions. I like to think that it was kind of mutual and equal, but that's not for me to decide. And then when I was with Nova, we had much younger players, the oldest being Starboy at 19, the youngest being Truth at 13. So much different approach there, still managing personalities. Different types of fights, still being mediator, different types of disagreements, still, playing the mediator role. So, helping them prepare draft. And a, a lot of these pro players, they spend so much time playing the game and practicing the game. They don't like, for me, if I truly and honestly spend my time preparing a draft for a team in my free time, not if I was doing it as a full-time job, but in my free time, between my real job and between watching scrims and between living my life, eating food, dealing with my children, things like that. So, you're talking an hour or two a day. If I really am preparing my draft, it probably takes me a good, 4 days to a week to prepare a real actual draft for a team. You know, so a lot of players just they don't have the time, or they don't have the understanding of how to really prepare a draft. Like I said, Iraqi, like I had an understanding of the draft, I had an understanding of comps, but going into the London finals with Gangstars, I didn't have an understanding of how to prepare a draft, and I learned a lot about that from Iraqi. So not all players have that understanding. So, some of that is what it takes to be a coach. So it's not all about skill, it's not all about mechanics, it's more about mentality. Being able to manage personalities, being able to guide personalities, and frankly, being able to understand people. I think that's one thing that's always been my strength, is you have to understand, like some players, I there are some players that I have coached that I can say, look, you fuck this up, you need to do it different next time. And there are other players where if you say that, they get tilted or they tune you out, or so you have to finesse them a different way. So being a problem solver, being able to understand people, people of different ages, how to guide them, how to help them, and how to influence them and get them on board. Some teams respond well to kind of a dictatorship. I'm the coach, it's my way or it's no way. And other teams don't. Sometimes you have to convince them that it was their idea. Sometimes you have to put the thought in their head and just kind of keep nagging on them about it. So if you are not a high skill tier player, but you have a love for coaching, you have a love for teaching, you have a love for dealing with personalities, and you're interested in being a coach, I say go for it. Now, it's going to be an uphill battle to get into it. It's just like casting. I have a goal to cast for SEMC and the VG8. It's, I can't even get into VIS. So it's an uphill battle. The opportunities don't come up very often. And, just because you want something doesn't mean that you're actually good at it. I don't know how good of a caster I am. I cast for NACL, I cast for CSL. I don't know how good of a caster I am. I don't know if people enjoy listening to me. But I do it and I keep moving forward and I have my goal in mind. And if I make it, I do. If not, I'm going to enjoy the journey. So if you're interested in being a coach, I would say go for it. Hopefully, some of my insight here about what you need to do to be a coach will help you, build your knowledge, build your statistical understanding, work on your people skills. You don't have to be a great player to be a great coach. And I will tell you that there are lots of VG teams out there. I say lots, but there's only 8 teams in the VG, but there's also VIS level teams that are looking, that would love to have a coach, but most people won't give them the opportunity because there's no money behind it. And that's another thing. If you're going to get into coaching, don't expect to be paid. If you are paid, be thankful, even if it's, a couple $100 a month, because there's just not a lot of salary out there for coaches at the moment. If you get in with one of the bigger orgs, you might be able to get bigger salary, but there's not huge salaries out there for coaches right now in the Vainglory community. So if you're doing it for the love of it, and just honestly keep your eyes out and be active on Twitter, watch Twitter. That's where I've seen most of it. Like I said, the Nova one was somebody seeing my post on Twitter that I was a free agent looking for a coaching gig. That's how I got in with Nova. I just saw, I got in with Gangstars because I saw their tweet. I had the opportunity for Fnatic and Echo Fox because I saw, a tweet on Fuji's timeline, and Fnatic tweeted about being, about looking for a coach. That's how I found all of these things. So you gotta, that's, if you're wondering how you're going to find out, that's probably how you're going to find out most of the time. I've seen Tempo Storm in the past tweet about looking for a coach. That's when they picked up Odds. Nova just tweeted about looking for a PUBG manager. So that's how orgs are looking for esports coaches and other staff like that. And if you can't find something as a coach, all coaching staffs will love to have, if love to have manpower. That's one thing as a coach that I never had enough of was manpower. Analyst, if you're really good at math or you're really good at Excel, but even if you're not, if you're just willing to be a data farmer, there's so much data out there to be farmed and just not a lot of manpower. If you're willing to volunteer your time and you're not expecting pay, you can get on with almost any coaching staff. Just contact them. They'll probably take you on if you can prove your value. And that's at least a way to get a foot in the door if you're interested in being a coach. So I am Belligerent. Follow me on Twitter at belligerent_VG. Check out my YouTube channel, which is maybe where you're listening to this podcast. I'm also starting a YouTube channel on the new game I'm a huge fan of, which is called Rules of Survival. Check that out. You can find this podcast on iTunes. I did have somebody message me on Twitter, a friend of mine, and say, you need to get your podcast on one of the podcasting mediums so I can listen to it on my phone, because I don't want to always sit and watch a video. So if that's you, you can get this on iTunes. We are on the iTunes podcast app or whatever. If you go there, search my name, BLG3RNT, it'll pull up our podcast. If you search for The Q, there are other podcasts called The Q, and there are other podcasts with The Q name in it. So the easiest way to find us on iTunes is to just search my name, because I'm listed as the author. But we are on iTunes. We appreciate the love, the tweets, the questions, the answers, the comments. I love all of that stuff. I don't always get to it immediately, but I will get to as many as humanly possible at some point in time. I don't like to just respond right away, because sometimes you ask tough questions, like the question that inspired this podcast, which is way over time now. So I'm going to go ahead and sign off. I am Belligerent. This is The Q. Thanks for listening.